Hello, and welcome to Yesterday, Today, and Forever, a virtual ministry of the Churches of Christ. It is our desire to present to the 21st century person the faith of the first century Christians. We seek unity through the acceptance of the faith that was once and for all time delivered unto the saints, a system of faith which first began to be spoken by our Lord prior to his crucifixion, and was later confirmed to the saints by the apostles and inspired writers of the New Testament. Thus a faith from yesterday to today and into forever. Our speaker is Brian Barrett, who preaches for the church at Bear Branch, in Spurlockville, West Virginia. We encourage all persons interested in the faith of our fathers to open their Bibles, as we search the Scriptures, for these eternal truths, which can lead Christians back into unity as the family of God. Now, here is Brian.
We're studying this morning in the book of John, chapter 7. We're going to, last week we were discussing, and we're going to kind of pick up from that, Jesus and his brethren, who some of which seemed to question him in some of the things that were being said. Not fully believing or believing in him, as we see here, had encouraged him to go up to the Festival of Tabernacles and make himself known to men, doing miracles, performing those things that he was doing around Galilee, that it not be done in secret, but begin to do it more openly. Now, holding to that, as we said, is probably the underlying idea that originally they were expecting the Messiah to reign and rule from the seat of David, which was Jerusalem, and that he was going to set up an army and all these kind of things that went along with the present day theology of the time. And so, if he was going to get busy with his disciples and followers and do that, he needed to go to Jerusalem. And so they had encouraged him. We see the phrase in verse 6, "My time is not yet come." And that is in reference to, of course, the crucifixion of Jesus and what God had planned. They're encouraging him to do one thing, which is part of the traditional customs that many had been led to believe. But Jesus said, God's plan, God's time, my time is not yet come. And so as we look here in verse 8, where we're going to pick up this morning, he says, "Go ye up unto this feast. I will not go up yet unto this feast, for my time is not yet full come." When he had said these things unto them, he abode still in Galilee. But when his brethren were gone up, then went he also up unto the feast, not openly, but as it were in secret. Then the Jews sought him at the feast, and said, "Where is he?" And there was much murmuring among the people concerning him, for some said, "He is a good man." Others said, "Nay, but he deceiveth the people." Howbeit no man spake openly of him for fear of the Jews. This is showing us the conflicts that were between Jesus. Earlier last week we were talking about the fact that Jesus had not walked among the area of Judea, the area of the Jews, but was staying up in Galilee, trying to minimize some of the conflicts that were taking place between him and the Jewish leaders. And in verse 13, in the end of what we just read, it talks about howbeit, no man spake openly of him for fear of the Jews, and that would be the Jewish leaders. They were concerned that what would happen if they did And we know in the course of time and events, even it became so strong that if anyone confessed the belief in Jesus or seemed to believe in Jesus, that they would even cast them out of the synagogues. And so people were very careful about what they said, lest they attract unwanted attention to themselves and also to their families. And one thing the Jewish leaders were very good at is inflicting various types of trauma upon those who disagreed with them. And it was all right to disagree, but if you did, we'll destroy you. So, and you have a right to your opinion, but after I hear it, I'm going to ruin your life. That's kind of the way that many times these events happened. And so they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, and for good reason. Jesus was at odds with them, and they were plotting to kill him. And so it's not like the people, the general population, wasn't aware of the attitude that these individuals had. Now, as we look at this, Jesus is talking to his family. We know that as a Jewish male, we keep saying this, but we want to understand it. As a Jewish male, you were obligated to go to Jerusalem on Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, you were welcome to go to Jerusalem and worship anytime you wanted to. But these three festivals were mandatory for the men of Israel to participate in. And so to not do that, I mean, if you were a healthy male capable of going within reasonable travel distance, and you made a choice not to go, then you're basically, or actually, I suppose, making a conscious decision to disobey something that God has said. And we would liken that situation to Hebrews 10:25, where the Hebrew writer says, not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together as the manner of some is, but again, encouraging one another more so as we see the day approaching. And so when the first day of the week comes, the people of God assemble for worship, partaking of the communion, teaching, preaching, singing, praying, giving. There's certain obligations that we must meet on the first day of the week. Now, there are other things, other days of the week that we may assemble, but on Sunday we must assemble. That's the difference. We must assemble on Sunday. We may assemble on any other day of the week we choose. The Jews could come to Jerusalem to worship at the temple anytime they wanted to, but they must, the Jewish men must appear before God at Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. It's not a may, it's a must. This was part of the Old Covenant. So if Jesus purposely didn't go up, if he made a decision, I'm not going to go at all, then he would be making the same kind of decision that this morning I got up and, I just didn't feel like going to the service. I think I'll just stay home and, I'll get an early start on the football games and, I'll do this and that and maybe I'll go fishing. I saw some people fishing down here this morning in the lake as we come up. And so, if I made that conscious decision to do something else when I was capable of being here, I would be committing a very willful sin, a willful act of disobedience. And so Jesus tells his disciples, I'm not going to go up yet unto this feast. But he goes on and says that they can go ahead, and when they had left and they had began their journey towards Jerusalem, then after they had left, he went up secretly, quietly, and in a stealthy kind of manner. People were aware of Jesus. They knew that if the people were required, the men were required to be at Jerusalem, he would be going. And so both for his friends as well as his enemies, they knew that the best place to look for him would be traveling with his family, because that's the way generally people do it. They don't all go separately from the same household or family, but they would join together in the journey to Jerusalem, to the feast, back from the feast. For the Jewish people, these times were like family reunions. I mean, all the people came together there in Jerusalem. It had a spiritual aspect, but it also had other benefits besides the worship. Now, as we look at this, and I just want to point this out, I like to do it sometimes when we're studying. The King James, Jesus says in verse 8, "Go ye up unto this feast. I go not up yet unto this feast, for my time is not yet full come." So he wasn't going to go at that particular time. But he he uses the word yet in the King James. I go not up yet unto this feast. That implies that Jesus acknowledged that he intended to stay back for a while, and for whatever purpose or for whatever reason, he intended to delay his going up. Now, in some of the newer translations, which are based on what I deem to be faulty text, but lots of people say they're the oldest and the best. So if you're using the oldest and the best, when you read those verses, Jesus lies, because he tells his brethren, I go not up unto this feast. And the translation literally says that he wasn't going. The word yet is not there. And so they say it's more accurate for it to be translated from that I'm not going up. The implication is I'm not going up at all. And then after they leave, he goes up privately. Well, I guess you can wrestle with it however you want, but to me, that would be a lie. If I told you I wasn't going to do something, and then I changed my mind, or I purposely misled you into believing, and we know Jesus knows what he intends to do. And so it's not like he changed his mind, and Jesus knew he had an obligation to go to the feast. And so if he says, I'm not going up, and then he turns around and goes, there's a conflict there that is created in those passages. However, the King James, there is no conflict, there's no problem. Jesus just tells his family, I'm not going up yet. You all go ahead, take off, I'll catch up with you. I'll be there. I'm just not going up yet. And so you can do with that whatever you please, but, lots of people insist that they want to use and embrace some of these newer translations, and this is one of those places. Now, we're going to get into a whole bunch of stuff here with some of those new translations, those newer, better translations based on the older and better text. We're going to get into all that when we get toward the end of this chapter and into the next chapter. But nonetheless, you can see what kind of wrestling you have to do. That Jesus wasn't going to go, and then he said he changed his mind and went. Well, if he's the Son of God, he ought to know he ought to be going. He shouldn't tell people he's not going if he intends to go. But that one little word, yet, makes all the difference in the world. What do you got over there?
Oh, same thing.
Which
Matthew Tyndale's,
yeah,
1537.
and it uses yet.
It says, "Go ye up unto this feast. I'll not go up yet unto this feast, for my time is not yet come."
So again, if he went up, the whole point of this is, if I go up with you now and I make a big public spectacle like you're trying to get me to do, it's going to mislead the people into believing something that's not, it's not ready, it's not ripe yet. You're trying to pull an apple off a tree that's not ripe, no matter how bad you want it. It's just not right. It's not part of God's plan. And so he had a plan that he wanted to follow. And he spoke to them about this, verse 9, while he was yet in Galilee. And so when his brethren were gone up, then went he also up unto the feast, not openly, but as it were in secret. And so, this all works out well, as best I can see, when we're following these Bibles that people have been using for centuries. Everything flows naturally. We understand why Jesus would not want to go up with his family in some big, grand, and spectacular way, having already known that the Jews were going to cause problems. And so he is correct, because notice verse 11, "Then the Jews sought him at the feast and said, Where is he?" See, Jesus knew that they were going to be looking for him. And they knew who his mother was. After all, isn't that stuff they say? Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother Mary? Isn't his brothers and sisters and family? Aren't they all here with us? It's not like, well, gee, I have no clue where Jesus' family's from. I wouldn't know them if they ran over me. They knew who Jesus was. They knew his family. They had spent some time looking in to this carpenter from Nazareth, trying to figure out exactly who he was and what was going on. And so his brethren came up, and when his brethren showed up, the Jews were there looking for him. Now this, again, is talking primarily about the Jewish leaders, the Sanhedrin, those who were at odds with him. And so we have to be careful with that term, the Jews. The people, the everyday people, were looking for him, no doubt also, but not for the same reason. So, John usually, when he uses the term the Jews, he's talking about the Jewish leaders. That's caused a lot of people to have a bad hatred of the Jews in general, when they really should lay the blame where it should be, and that is at the feet of the Jewish leaders, and not, some Jewish man who was living back in the countryside. He wasn't the one who was plotting and planning to kill Jesus. They weren't all around, the farmers and carpenters and all those weren't in, some secret agreement that we're going to kill him. It was the leaders, again, as I say, up in the temple, in their little hidey hole back up there where only they could get, where the Sanhedrin council met all the way up in the temple, so that nobody else was going to hear about all of their little plots and plans, except people who absolutely had to be there. And if they shut the door and excluded some of those that were even up there, even fewer people knew what they were plotting and planning. And so they sought him at the feast, and they said, Where is he? He should be here. And where is he? But they couldn't find him. And so There was much murmuring among the people concerning him. Now notice the difference. John speaks about the Jews and he talks about the people. Always watch that. The Jews he's referring to are the Sanhedrin and many of the Pharisees and Sadducees and all of those who were conspiring together. But the people also were looking for Jesus. But they were looking for him for a different reason. See, Jesus did miracles. Jesus helped them. Jesus was kind to them. What would he do? They were interested in him for other reasons. What he might teach, what he might say. Some, no doubt, wanted to know where he was because they wanted to see a good fight between him and the Pharisees arguing over stuff. But the people were looking for him for one reason, and the Jews, the Jewish leaders, were looking for him for another. And so we have this statement in verse 13. Let's verse 12. And there was much murmuring among the people concerning him. For some said, he is a good man. Others say, nay, but he deceiveth the people. And so there were these various factions, as well as the leaders, all these people. But one thing stands out. Just about everybody who knew anything about anything was looking for Jesus. For whatever reason, they were looking for him. Some liked him, thought he was going to be the Messiah, was going to be the great deliverer of Israel. Some thought he was a deceiver. Some were jealous of him. Some had this idea, that idea. Lots of things were going on, but it was apparent that everybody was looking for him, just as he said. Howbeit no man spake openly of him for fear of the Jews. And we're back to the Jewish leaders, not just the Jews in general, but they feared the leaders that were there in the temple. And so there was murmuring, there was a lot of whispering, there was a lot of little small side discussions, whispering, not saying things openly, not big, bold, open discussions, but, 2 or 3 people here whispering about something. Where is he? Have you heard anything about Jesus? But they weren't going to make a public kind of statement because they feared what the Jewish leaders might even do to them. And as I said, they had good reason for that. Anybody have any comments or anything down through 13? As we come into verse 14, it says, now about the midst or the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and taught. If I understand it correctly, and I'm not an absolute scholar in all this, but if I understand the Feast of Tabernacles correctly, it was an 8-day festival. And so people dwelt in these booths, tents, whatever, over or were supposed to in the process of these 8 days. Now, some of the Jewish people would stay on these housetops, rooftops, and erect some little booth up there and stay in it. It wasn't like they were all at a campground somewhere, but to fulfill the obligation, they would go to some of these houses and they would get up on the rooftops where they stayed. A lot of the guests stayed on the roof, and so they would have these little booths up there so they could pretend they were out in the wilderness, and so it would bring back memories. So this 8-day feast, in the middle of it, everyone was looking for Jesus at the start. And Jesus says, I'm not going up yet. You all go ahead, and I'm not going up yet. And so in the middle of it, when they had time to say, well, I guess he's just not going to show up. people were beginning to think, well, we're right in the heart of it and he hasn't showed up. Well, right there in the middle of it, as people were kind of wondering, why didn't he show up? Why didn't he come? And again, the murmuring and talking and everybody discussing it. They had maybe 4 days to discuss these issues among themselves. And so in the middle, or in the midst of all of that, he came up into the temple and he taught. And so he shows up, and he does, when he shows up, what he was prone to do, and that is he began to teach. And of course, we have seen his teachings. We've heard some of the things. I always tell people, if you want to know what Jesus was talking about, go back to Matthew 5, 6, 7. Whatever he was talking about there is the same thing he was talking about in other places. There may have been a few things that he said more, and there may have been a few things that he said less, but those are the things that Jesus was talking about: everyday life, devotion to God, being a good person, hungering and thirsting after righteousness, being a good person, don't rebel against the government. If they compel you to go 1 mile, go 2. These are the type of things that Jesus was prone to teach. And so he's up in the temple preaching these things. Now, Jesus wasn't, and this is what we need to understand, the Jewish leaders made it sound like he was up there in the temple saying things like, kill the high priest, overthrow the Romans. That's the way they made it sound like he was, that he was some kind of heretic teaching things, trying to lead the people into some kind of rebellion. That's the way they wanted the people to think of him, but that's not who he was. That's not what he was teaching. And so the Jewish leaders were trying to convince people that he was some kind of heretic, that he was going to get the whole nation of Israel in trouble with the Romans. And in reality, they're the ones that were going to be responsible for being at ill will with the Romans and them coming and taking away their place in nation. And that's what they were worried about. And we'll see that a little bit later in John. And so, he was in the temple. He was there teaching. And, like I said, these ideas of, love your neighbor as yourself, as you would have others, do unto you, do likewise, all these different things that he taught. And so he went up and he taught. In verse 15, and the Jews marveled, saying, how knoweth this man letters, having never learned? Now, it's not just saying that he can read. That's not what they're saying. What they're saying is, how does this man know these kind of teachings? How does this man know and understand and interpret the prophecies and all of the scriptures? Because he's never been in one of our schools. Jesus did not have a degree. He wasn't like Gamaliel. He didn't have a doctorate in theology or the law. He didn't have all these credentials. He was a carpenter's son. He was a carpenter. Is not the carpenter? Is not the son of Mary? Those kind of things. And so here we see that the Jewish leaders were listening to what he was saying. And it confused them to a certain degree, because they were questioning even among themselves. We spent years learning these things. How does this man know these things? He's a carpenter's son. He can't afford scrolls. And when I started preaching, of course, I hadn't been to a preaching school. I I learned the trade basically by sitting, listening, and began working part-time, preaching at different places. And over the process of time, I bought books and all these kind of things and studied more and studied more and studied more, and then did more formal type studies. But in that day and age, to have an entire copy of what we call the Old Testament, that would be extremely expensive. And even today, if you get a handwritten scroll, when a synagogue buys one of these handwritten scrolls, in keeping with the customs and traditions of the Jewish people, these things can cost $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. And so if you go back and you think about what a carpenter would make in that day and age, they probably ate and they had decent life, had clothes, but they didn't have that kind of money to spend. And it took almost a year's salary for even some of the best individuals to get a copy, because it took a scribe almost a year to make a copy. You don't Xerox this. You have no movable type. So this is the reason these people are confused. And I'll use that term and I'll just leave it at that. He hasn't been to school. He hasn't spent time in the libraries that they would have that would contain some of the writings that today are part of what is referred to as the Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud was a series of commentaries that Jewish scholars made interpreting various points of the scripture, various aspects of Jewish life. And so that would be in addition to the scrolls. And so if you wanted to study the scrolls and you wanted to study as a Pharisee, you'd have to have access to the Talmud. You'd have to have access to scrolls. This man doesn't have that stuff. A synagogue might have, and a rabbi might have access to that, but no rabbi had ever come forth saying that they were the ones who taught Jesus. And so they didn't understand where he got this, and it's a reasonable thing. And it's a reasonable thing that people were questioning, listening to him, and you have to understand what they're saying, listening to him, teaching there in the temple. They weren't arguing among themselves about what he was saying. They weren't saying, listen to him. That's craziness. That's what you'd expect to hear from a carpenter. That's not what they're saying. They're not trying to insult him. They just don't have an explanation for him. And they listen as he teaches. They're not directly challenging him, but they're just listening. And like many of the others murmuring, they're asking themselves, how could he possibly know these things? And so this is where we're at. He's never attended a school. He's never received a degree. No one has ever admitted to teaching him anything. And we know Jesus' custom was to be in the synagogue on the Sabbath day, but that's different. Everybody should be in the synagogue on the Sabbath day that were Jews. That's nothing extraordinary. But they're complimenting him in a sense that they're acknowledging that his level of knowledge does not equal his level of education. And that's the confusing part. They don't know how to reconcile that. So the thing with me is if they knew that, if they knew that he had accurate understanding of the scriptures. And he wasn't necessarily misapplying them. And they were more concerned about how he got that education rather than what he was saying. Then again, we see that, it's an issue of jealousy. It's an issue of many different things, but it's not about false doctrine. If it was about false doctrine, if he was teaching something that was just so off the wall that they couldn't stand it, then they would have called him on the carpet right there in the temple before the people while they had an opportunity. But there wasn't anything in what he was saying that really was wrong. And that's why they should have embraced. The problem was that they were more concerned about how he got the education than the fact he was educated. However he got it, wherever it came from, doesn't matter if it's accurate, if it's true, if it's profitable and beneficial for righteousness, then what difference does it make? But they wanted to make it a difference because they saw that the people were more interested in where Jesus was and if he was coming to the temple than any of the rest of them. They were looking for Jesus all over the place, from all the different cities, and they weren't saying, well, where's Rabbi so-and-so? Where's Rabbi so-and-so? Where are they at? And so the people were looking for Jesus, not for them. They didn't come to Jerusalem, many of them, to interact with the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, even though they had certain obligations, but they were coming there for Jesus. And so these verses here show us a lot about the conflict, about the hearts of these leaders, how corrupt and twisted they were, that seeing that he taught solid things, that, without having had an education, but then dismissing him because of whatever excuse they could come up with.
Why not make this the day that you and your family seek out the Church of Christ in your community? We encourage you to attend one of our worship times or Bible studies. God's grace, truth, and salvation is truly worth finding and knowing. May God bless and keep you as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the Churches of Christ salute you. Our new programs are posted to Facebook and YouTube on Thursday afternoon, and they should be available for viewing by 7 p.m. We also encourage our viewers to visit our website at www.thechurchesofchrist.life. We ask that you like us on Facebook and share our programs. On YouTube, please share and subscribe for notifications. This program was pre-recorded.